Well, thank you so much. And really, it is quite an honor, and may I say also something of an education to be on this panel with such distinguished scholars and experts. And I want to actually, if I can for a moment, speak a little bit about the presentation of Cengiz Akhtar, which I found really fascinating and sort of casts this broader issue that we're looking at in a more historic light. I will be honest, I had not given deep consideration to the reverberations of the Armenian genocide down through the decades and its role in somehow preparing, if you might say that, the people of Turkey to have a high level of tolerance for the outrages that are currently being perpetrated by the Erdogan regime. You know, it reminded me a little bit of a book I read some years ago, which I would recommend to all of you, titled It Was a Long Time Ago and It Never Really Happened, which is a book written by an American journalist who had spent some time in Russia and was focusing on Russia's absolute failure to acknowledge and to process as a nation the extraordinary crimes that had been committed during the period of Stalinism and beyond. And the premise of that book, which is one that I very much subscribe to, is that any country that is unwilling and aggressively unwilling to face its history, to acknowledge its past, in fact, is sort of implanting a kind of a damaged DNA, if you will. You know, I think this is sort of, again, relating to your presentation, because it becomes very difficult to move forward in a healthy way, in a positive way, when there is this unwillingness to face the reality of one's history. It makes me think of an analogy that I have used in other contexts. And I often preface it by saying that I am the world's least talented mathematician. I was very happy just to be able to memorize my times tables when I was in elementary school. So math is not my strong suit, but I've always had great admiration and even awe for those people who can stand in front of multiple blackboards in a classroom with these extraordinary complex equations that go from blackboard to blackboard to blackboard and lead to some very important mathematical conclusion. But although I have no ability to even begin to comprehend that kind of a mathematical equation, I know enough about simple logic to understand that if that mathematician makes a critical error on the first blackboard early on in the equation, it really doesn't matter what comes next. You will never get to the right answer until you go back and fix the error early on in the equation. And I feel that that's sort of what you were talking about, Cengiz, in your presentation. And I think it's really a very profound point, and I thank you for it because it gives me a sort of more historic sense of understanding what you talked about in terms of a very significant percentage of the population in Turkey having a dangerous level of comfort with the direction of the Erdogan regime. And Kenes, and really all of you, Rabia and oh my gosh, our first speaker, Jocelyn, excuse me, I didn't see you up there, Jocelyn, but each one of you have really deepened my understanding of this issue. And I want to sort of echo what you were saying a moment ago, Kenes, about how extraordinarily disheartening and even depressing it is to see the disinterest, the nonchalance, and the simple turning away of the world to the atrocities that are unfolding in Turkey. It is just morally inexcusable and reprehensible, and it shows the difficulty and the complexity of the intersection of those who profess support for fundamental human rights in the very hard realpolitik world in which significant and big actors, Turkey is a significant and a big actor on the world stage. China is another example of an outrageous human rights abuser who is a very significant economic actor in the world and obviously rising political force in the world. The tendency that we have, and when I say we, I'm talking about the United States, to give a pass to outrages when they are taking place in countries where we have understandably we have a wide range of interests and needs and political demands. It is still something that I find very deeply disturbing. So I'm on this panel with a lot of people who know more about the subject, I think, in many ways than I do. But I'd like to, in my brief remarks, sort of just take, if I may, a sort of generalist's approach to looking at what is going on in Turkey. I come at this discussion from the perspective of a human rights activist. And if we know one thing, we know that human rights tend to flourish in democracies, and the reverse is also true, that human rights are always in jeopardy in non-democratic systems. The premise of this panel, as I understand it, is that Turkey is no longer a democracy. And so it follows, as the night follows the day, that in fact, as Turkey has retreated from democracy towards greater and greater authoritarianism, human rights and fundamental freedoms have also retreated. And of course, the evidence of this is overwhelming. If we think about what are the kind of very basic strong pillars of a democracy, of a system that has a functioning democracy, and this list is again going to be basic, bare bones, by no means comprehensive, but I think we would certainly identify a free press as central to a functioning democracy. An independent judiciary, absolutely essential. A related thing, it's not exactly the same as an independent judiciary, but a society in which there is robust respect for the rule of law. Something that others haven't mentioned, although it has been alluded to by some of you, something that I would put as central, really central to a functioning democracy is respect for freedom of religion, conscience, and belief, for the basic conscience rights of citizens. Certainly, protections for a vibrant civil society. That includes the right to peaceably assemble, the right to dissent and protest against the government. And of course, we can never overlook the importance, the centrality. It's not enough all by itself, but it is a sine qua non of a democratic system, and that is free and fair elections. So if we just in our minds sort of scroll through this general list that I've laid out there, I think we would have to say that with one exception, these pillars that I've identified are deeply eroded, if not entirely gone in Turkey today. And the one exception that I'll talk about towards the very end is the question of elections and what role they might still have in trying to reclaim some of these other pillars of a democratic system. So let's just very, very briefly look, and I know just glancing at my watch that it's your hope, Alon, to have plenty of time for questions, so I'll keep the rest of my remarks fairly brief. But, I started out mentioning a free press. Well, you all know, and I hope our audience also knows, that under Erdogan, and certainly since the coup, we have seen an all-out assault on independent media. Huge numbers of media organizations have been shut down or taken over. Enormous numbers of journalists, Turkish journalists and media workers have been imprisoned and in many cases sentenced to serve long periods in prison, basically for the crime of being journalists, for the crime of doing their jobs as journalists. They've been charged under the dangerously, endlessly elastic anti-terrorism laws. And of course, the way Turkey is using anti-terrorism laws, anything that the government seeks to construe as terrorism can be sort of encompassed and drawn in. And the way in which these laws are being used against the free media in Turkey is it's being used as a form of state repression and revenge, and has instituted a kind of anti-free press terror of its own. An independent judiciary. Following the failed coup in July of 2016, vast numbers of judges, prosecutors, law enforcement personnel were detained, were fired, were investigated. Many of them have been charged and imprisoned. And the chilling and intimidating effect of this assault on the independent judiciary is absolutely undeniable and far-reaching, and has completely undermined the credibility of the Turkish judicial system. You don't have to take my word for it. The EU just a couple of months ago in October issued a blistering condemnation of Turkey on these issues. So, you know, it's not a matter of opinion. You know, these are the evidence, as I say, is overwhelming. So obviously, when you have that kind of an assault on an independent judiciary and sort of system of justice, the rule of law gets trampled underfoot. And this has happened on a massive, massive scale in Turkey. Tens and tens and tens of thousands of people have been rounded up and imprisoned for no crime, for nothing, because of their identity or their affiliation, perhaps, with the Hizmet movement, because they had been seen as critical of the regime, simply because it would be useful to intimidate millions of others to make an example of them. And in addition to these tens of thousands, and I keep sort of myself to the description of tens and tens of thousands, because I don't think we know the full scope and the full extent of things. And we read reports ranging from 60,000 to hundreds of thousands. And I'm not myself in a position to know the accuracy, but we know it's on a vast scale. In addition to these thousands of individual victims, and, you know, Ken, as you spoke about the numbers of women and children caught up in this outrageous and unlawful dragnet. But it's also been targeted at institutions. So, as I said, newspapers, schools, civil society institutions, human rights defenders, of course, have been targeted, including, you know, it takes a lot of chutzpah. I will reference my my Jewish and my Yiddish roots by using the, I hope, well-known expression of chutzpah, which is kind of, well, you all know what chutzpah is. But, you know, they have even had the chutzpah to go after the Turkish chair of Amnesty International. So, you know, and again, when we see an authoritarian regime and an authoritarian leader like Erdogan specifically target people who you think would have a degree of protection, you know, you would think, well, gosh, Amnesty International, a highly respected, long established, well-known global human rights institution, they're not going to go after him. You know, they're going to go after more vulnerable targets. But it sends an unbelievably chilling and powerful message when you go after people you think, you know, they won't dare go there. And when they dare to go there, the chilling and terrifying message is very effectively
2 minutes.
Communicated to others. I'm sorry, do we need to wrap up, did you say?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, you know, the abandonment of rule of law. I mentioned respect for freedom of religion and belief. It's central to any functioning democracy. And obviously, at the heart of much of the abuse that has gone on is this incredible effort to attack, to crush, and to brutally abuse the members of the Hizmet movement, and to falsely accuse them of being behind the coup, And they are not the only communities of faith and conscience that have been targeted, but the targeting of them has been, really a massive human rights violation that deserves the attention of the world. Talked about assembly, the bans we've seen on the blanket bans on assemblies we've seen in cities around the country, police violently suppressing peaceful demonstrations. So let me quickly turn to what I think might be the one glimmer of hope in what is a very bleak landscape, and that is the issue of elections. As we know, in the summer of 2019, Erdogan suffered what was widely described as a stunning setback and really a stinging rebuke and defeat when his chosen candidate for mayor of Istanbul, and this was replicated in many large cities around Turkey, was defeated. And even after he was defeated in the first round and they attempted to overturn that in the second round election, the victory of the forces of democracy, if I may say so, was even stronger. So I think that this indicates that that democracy, although struggling in Turkey, is not completely obliterated. And it does give us a glimmer of hope. And it says to me that the Turkish people, through the ballot, have demonstrated that they are not prepared to completely submit to the crushing of their democracy. And so I take a little bit of hope from that. And I also hope that in the new administration, we'll see a greater commitment to holding Erdogan accountable for the massive human rights abuses that have taken place under his regime.